Coogs House. All right. $11 million is a lot of money. $5 million is a lot of money. Jarace Walker and Marcus Sasser of the Houston Cougars just got that much guaranteed, respectively, after last night. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater can step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way we can lay us on the Cougs into your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. It is good to see you again. Remember, we're doing a giveaway every 250 subscribers, and the next one of those marks is at 1,500. We're over 1,250 now. Shouts to Juan for winning the hat at the last giveaway. Still trying to figure out what we're giving away at 1,500, but it will be something nice, fun, and Cougar themed. So make sure you subscribe down below to help us get there. And comment and like on the videos to make sure we know you're entered in the YouTube contest. If after listening to us talk some about the NBA draft and Jarace and Marcus and other guys and stuff like that from Houston, and you have nothing else to say after all that, tell us if you're, because the draft was in New York last night. Are you a New York pizza style person, a Chicago style pizza person, Detroit style pizza person? Shouts to Marcus getting some Detroit style pizza, or something else? Down in the comments below. All right, so today's episode is going to be all about the draft. Last night, as we're recording this on Friday afternoon, I guess Friday about noon, through a number of different reasons. But Jarace Walker, first segment, because he was the first pick from Houston. He went to Indiana. We'll talk about him and his fit in Indiana, how that happened. Marcus Sasser ends up going 25th overall to Detroit. He's our second segment. Excited for Marcus. We'll talk more about how that all transpired in the second one. And the third segment, I want to look at the 2024 draft because we both think that Houston's going to be good next year. What does the 2024 draft look like for the Houston Cougars? But first, let's start with Jarace Walker. Now, he was technically drafted 8th by the Washington Wizards and traded to the Indiana Pacers, who swapped 7th and 8th picks. Indiana had the 7th pick. And for whatever reason, Washington also included a couple of 2028 second-round picks in the trade. Let's say, more or less, he was drafted 8th, but he is an Indiana Pacer. Now, what's interesting to me here is that, if you remember yesterday's episode, I talked to Tony East from Locked On Pacers before the draft. I thought Indiana was a perfect fit for Jarace. It's a great place. He's not the big flashy need New York City or Miami or LA Lights. He's not that kid. It's a great place, the good core, a great coach, champion coach. And so let's talk through what some of these fits are. First of all, he's the immediate starting power forward. Like he walks in day one, he is the clear-cut starting power forward in Indiana. He'll be playing with Tyrese Halliburton, who's a great distributing, tall, long point guard. He'll be playing with Buddy Hield, a tremendous, one of the best shooters in the league to space the floor. Behind him at center, he'll either have Miles Turner, who can either play down low as a more traditional giant because he's a true big man, but also can space the floor and shoot threes. And then at the other spot, you have Walker obviously playing the power forward. And then the other spot, you can either play Chris Duarte, who's like a smaller shooter type, or Benedict Mathurin, a little bit longer guy who shot really well in college. We'll see if his numbers end up evening out like that in the pros. Mathurin was their first-round pick a year ago. Tremendous upside because great talent, young talent, but nothing that's like cutting into Jarace. I mean, Jarace may get 38 minutes a game out the gate. Now, I'd imagine he kind of works his way up to that. That's more traditional, but like generally speaking, that's a team that he will get a lot of clock in right away. It's also a team, and this is more about the team itself broadly, that won 25 games in the 2021-22 season, 35 games in the 2022-2023 season, and finished 11th in the East. They're looking to win. They're done tanking. They're done doing all that kind of stuff. They're looking to get from the 11th spot in the East into that play-in, if not higher. You can see like above them where the Raptors, the Nets, the Bulls, those teams are all teams that could fall back, whether it's the Bulls and Lonzo Ball's injury or, the Nets and they're blowing things up and that kind of stuff. The Raptors seem to be blowing things up too. Those are all spots you could see Indiana elevate into, get into the playoffs, get some playoff Jarace in year one would be tremendous. And he's the kind of guy that impacts winning in a situation that needs him to come in and start helping them impact winning. All awesome. Awesome for him. On the floor itself, where I see him immediately fitting in is in short roll kind of situations. Now, he can spot up and shoot. We saw him do that at Houston, obviously. And so if they were to do more of the roll stuff with Miles Turner, I guess that's obviously one way to go about it. But what I like about putting in Jarace here is that Turner can also space the floor, can also put a low spot, right? Set screens along the outside for flares and those kinds of things. But then you got Walker on the roll in that short roll creator spot. Think about what we saw him do against Virginia or Cincinnati, even to some degree against East Carolina. And then in NCAA tournament, he did a little bit of it against Auburn and Miami. Something Houston didn't feature him a whole lot because of how strong Houston's guard play was. But when he needed to, you saw him do it very well. He's a great passer, great court vision on those short roll kind of things. Something like when, he and the point guard, theoretically, Terry Halliburton, run a pick and roll on the left wing, right? He rolls that elbow, maybe the nail, middle free throw line kind of spot, catch the ball. He can score up, he can attack the rim, he can shoot a floater, he can shoot a jump shot, or he can swing the ball and pass, he can hit cutters. Like, he is a great guy to have in the middle of that hub. What I think is fascinating is while Houston didn't necessarily feature him the most often, it was interesting to see, if you go back to his IMG tape, that was something he did a lot as a point forward at IMG, right? IMG, he was almost more like what Miami, the Heat uses Bam Adebayo. He'd bring the ball to the floor some and that kind of stuff. I'd imagine he gets some of those kinds of reps in Indiana as well. Again, his role was different than in Houston, and so it wasn't necessarily to do those kinds of things. But Indiana is going to feature him in a whole bunch of ways. I think what's going to be awesome is to watch the kid grow up there, to grow into that role, because he's got head coach Rick Carlisle there now as well. Carlisle was at Dallas when Dallas won the championship in 2011, was there for a long time, saw Dirk, saw a bunch of big power forwards come through there, right? A great power forward come there, and a bunch of Hall of Famers come through there, I should say. So we know Carlisle can coach, right? We know that's a good spot for him to be at. And Carlisle is also the kind of no-nonsense coach that mirrors Kelvin Sampson a lot, right? The same way that Walker chose Sampson in Houston. And I've always said that tells you as much you need to know about the five-star kid, that he chose to come to Houston and work hard for a guy like Kelvin Sampson. Tells us a lot about him. The same kind of coach now has him in Indiana. So while he doesn't get to pick his pro team in the same way he picks a college team, he gets a coach that's a lot of the same kinds of things. Great fit. I love this for Jarace. What I also love is in looking at how guys at the 8th pick get paid. I just looked at, like, last year, 2022, Dyson Daniels got drafted by New Orleans at pick 8. Okay, he signed a 4-year, $25 million contract with $11.2 million guaranteed. 5.5 and 5.75 in the first 2 seasons guaranteed. Then club deals in the latter half of that deal with a restricted free agent deal in year 5 for $10.3 million. That means by 5 years into his NBA career, you could be looking at Jarace Walker's making $35 million, right? Like, that is so good for the kid, right? That's a lot of money to play basketball. It's a kid living out his dream, but also that's like the kind of security you want in that lottery type deal. Like those lottery picks, the big deal about being a lottery pick is the kind of guaranteed money you're getting, even if you're maybe not on the best teams, because those are typically teams at the bottom of the barrel in the NBA, right? You're getting a lot of cash, a lot of like that. That's a good get for him. Also, I think the cool thing for him is he's getting that lottery deal with Indiana, but he's also, like I just mentioned at the start of that, on a team that looks like they could be doing some serious winning in the near future. So that combination is great for Jarace. We'll be following Jarace obviously throughout the season. Maybe have Tony on after a couple games in next year to talk about how they're using Jarace and that kind of stuff too next basketball season, because I really am really excited about what he's going to look like in a Pacers uniform out there in Indiana. Now, obviously, which is a little bit closer to home, and I guess I don't know that Marcus ended up any closer to home, although it is interesting to see Marcus go in the first round. So we'll talk about how great that is for Marcus and how he ended up in Detroit after being originally drafted by Memphis, and all of that in a second. But first, we got to talk about our buddies at Bird Dogs. Now, Bird Dogs is probably the sponsor, and I used to say this about Built Bar, but Bird Dogs is probably the sponsor I use the most out of anything we've got. I've got them on right now. Bird Dogs are this stretchy fabric shorts and pants that make you look good and feel good. You can wear them to the gym. You can wear them to the pool. You can wear them on a date. You can wear them in front of a classroom teaching. You can wear them lounge around your house. You can wear them while you sit here and make a podcast. You can wear them doing absolutely anything and everything. They're super comfortable. They look and feel great. Again, I've got the shorts on right now. I've worn the pants to work. I've worn these shorts to the pool, to the gym, to everywhere I go. They're really, really, really one of my favorite things in my closet. And if you go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, they will throw you a free Yeti style tumbler along with your order. It's got bird dogs in the front. It holds your cup of coffee, keeps your cold drinks cold, your hot drinks hot. We both know that cold drinks being cold in the summertime in Houston is a big, big deal. So make sure you go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege and grab yourself some pants and shorts today. They're the best things out there. Trust me. Thank me later. All right. So I said in the second segment, I'd talk some about Marcus because I love a lot of things about what happened when Marcus made the draft. But I think we got to clarify he is a Detroit Piston, right? I guess the trade has to be finalized, but he was originally drafted. I guess like he would have put the hat on or whatever if had he been there by Memphis. When his name gets called with the Memphis Grizzlies, the coolest scene of the night to me was seeing Jarace Walker drop the autograph he's signing, get over to Kelvin Sampson, and Kelvin Sampson, Quantis White, Jarace Walker are all just booming, elated happiness for Marcus when his name got called at 25th overall to the Memphis Grizzlies. Really, really cool program moment for the Houston Cougars there, right? Because Jarace and Marcus only played together for a year. So it's not like they have to have had this close relationship, but they clearly did, right? And then Sampson has hung his, Marcus has been his bell cow, like the Mr. Houston Cougar for a long time now. Quantis White works with the guards. We know they're super close. Like all of these things were so cool to see happen on TV live. Marcus also spoke to Houston media after the draft was over and said things about how much the program has supported him and how much the city of Houston supported him and those kinds of things too. How excited he was to be heading to Detroit. So let's talk about how that drafted by Memphis to Detroit thing happens. First, the draft pick was Memphis's based on how they finished the season. But in the Marcus Smart, Kristaps Porzingis trade that actually got sent to Boston the day before the draft. So Memphis has to draft him, but his rights were going to go to Boston as part of the agreement draft and the draft pick. So as soon as everyone passed their physicals, boom, he would be going to Boston. But in the moments before the pick, Boston traded it to Detroit, or Detroit, I should say, traded for the pick, and Boston moved back a few spots, like 31, I think it was, on draft night, a draft night type deal. So the pick itself actually changed hands in the 24 hours before before Marcus got picked a couple times. But he is now a Detroit Piston. He was Detroit's second pick of the night. Asar Thompson, the Thompson twin that isn't going to the Houston Rockets, was drafted by Detroit at the 5th overall pick. And so what's interesting to me about Marcus in Detroit is that there's a bunch of different guards on the Detroit Pistons with a bunch of different talents, right? They took Asar Thompson at 5, who is a tremendous athlete, 6'6", he runs, he jumps, but he really is not a shooter. He's a pretty good passer, probably not as good as his twin brother, but he's a pretty good passer, but is not a shooter, not a scorer in that kind of a threatening way. As far as the guys that were already in Detroit, they took Cade Cunningham with the number 1 overall pick a couple years ago. He's a 6'6" point guard that had a good shooting single season. He was a one and done in college at Oklahoma State, but really hasn't had that kind of shooting production in the pros, right? He's a 6'6" guy. He missed some time hurt and those kinds of things too, right? They took Jaden Ivey a year ago, who isn't necessarily the tremendous three-point shooter either. He's more of a 6'4" slasher type. And I think they just see a great athlete in he and Asar Thompson, right? Both guys are very athletic. Also on the roster there in Detroit, they've got Killian Hayes and R.J. Hampton as point guard, shooting guard type guys. But neither of them are tremendous shooters. So what sticks out to me is that Marcus Sasser at 6'2"-ish, right, might be the shortest, but with his wingspan, he actually makes up for that in a lot of ways, right? He has a 6'7" and change wingspan, and so he plays a lot bigger defensively than his height might typically allow for, and he projects to be by far and away the best shooter of any of these guys in the backcourt. Like I mentioned, Cade Cunningham shot just 30% from 3 in his time in the NBA. Ivy's at 34. Killian Hayes is down at 27. RJ Hampton is at 34. And Asar Thompson, who they took before Marcus earlier in that draft, shot just under 30% for the overtime elite, right? So that Marcus is up closer to 40 in college and has this long stretch of college games to look at to where you can see how like that's really a more like true projection. Marcus is going to be the most obvious three-point shooting threat in that backcourt, and that's where he's going to make his claim right there. I would also argue that while he isn't 6'6" like Cade or 6'7" like Asar Thompson, he is probably as good or not better than each of those other guards defensively, unless he's giving up 1,000 inches, right? So as far as guarding the other team's point guard, if you had he and Cade Cunningham out there, you'd want to put Marcus Sasser on the point guard unless the guy was like Luka Doncic 6'7", right? You'd want to put, if you had Marcus and Asar Thompson and Cade Cunningham out there, other three guys, you'd put Marcus Sasser on that John Morant type guy, or on that Dame Lillard type guy, or on that Steph Curry. You'd put Marcus Sasser there because of the tremendous defensive prowess there. I also think it's worth pointing out that, like, this Detroit roster seems somewhat in flux. Like, they're going to move. They got a Bogdanovich. They're going to move at some point, I'm sure, because they're in a rebuild, and Bogdanovich can net them some, space or whatever. They got a couple different options at big men for the pick and roll kind of stuff that we know Sasser does so well at. They got Marvin Bagley III, James Wiseman, Jalen Duren. Ironically, some American Athletic Conference guys there. I do like those guys as offensive role threats for Sasser. I'd probably like Duren the most. As far as how they pair up with Marcus, but I think they've got options there. I also probably like Duren as far as a rim protector, because with Marcus Sasser, you can play a much more aggressive up in the guy's grill defense on pick and rolls, navigating screens. He gets through screens very well, follows the hips. And so if you can get up in the guy's grill on those kinds of actions, then typically you want someone defending the rim behind them, because you're going to get beat some of those times, right? That's just like part of the gamble. And so having those young big men behind them that continue to develop as rim protectors can also help. Detroit's an interesting team in a number of ways. This isn't I don't host an NBA podcast, but I like what Houston's doing more than what Detroit's doing. But I will say that what I like about Marcus's fit with the Detroit backcourt, as even though there's a number of different guys, is he's clearly entering the room as the best guy at a couple of different things, shooting and defense, that you absolutely have to have, right? That's before you get into leadership stuff. Frankly, he's one of the older guys in the room because he is a 4-year college guy, as opposed to like Cade was one and done, or RJ Hampton. I think RJ Hampton's also a DFW kid. He and Marcus may actually know it. If you know that, tell me down below. Do Marcus and Hampton know each other? Because they're kind of the same age-ish and both from Dallas area. But on the whole, he's kind of this more mature guy as well, relative to Asar Thompson or whomever, right? I also, again, like being good at two things you have to have on the basketball floor to me means he will definitely play. The biggest part of this for Marcus, though, is that he went 25th overall and not 31st or later overall, because the first round is 30 picks, and the first round guys get a contract. And that contract for Marcus Sasser, comparing to last year's 25th overall pick, is important. So Blake Wesley last year was the 25th overall pick by the San Antonio Spurs. He got a 4-year, $12.5 million contract with $4.9 million guaranteed, right? That is awesome. Marcus Sasser tested the waters a year ago, right? He looked at going pro a year ago, and he's getting projected in the second round, and second round picks don't get guaranteed contracts. And so Marcus Sasser coming back for a senior season, yes, it was about winning. Yes, it's about culture. It's about finishing his degree. All those things are true. And I don't mean to diminish that those things weren't part of him coming back. But part of it was also moving up in the draft. And 2023 is a talented NBA draft. I mean, it's got generational talents at the top. It's got depth of role players throughout it. It was a tough draft to be drafted in. And Marcus Sasser was a clear first-round pick. I'm excited he got that guaranteed money. Again, based on last year's guy taken 25th, he'll get around $5 million or more guaranteed. That is awesome. Again, had he gone a year ago, he probably doesn't get anything guaranteed, and that's so perfect for him. Now, that's the 2023 draft, and we'll follow Marcus just like we follow Jarace. We'll follow his time in Detroit, or if they decide they have too many guards and you move off one, I think he's a very valuable guy you can see get moved. But on the whole, that's the 2023 draft. And we're looking at the Houston Cougars for 2023-24. But in 2023-24, they're going to have a lot of talent as well. And so who's going to make it in the 2024 draft? Because Houston has had a first-round pick in 2021. No one went last year. The Marcus might have been drafted last year. And they had 2 first-round picks in 2023. Who from the roster next year could be drafted first round in 2024? Let's jump into the next segment. So let's talk about who could get drafted in 2024. But let's talk about actually the first 2023 draft, right? So in the 2023 draft, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different teams or programs had multiple first-round picks. That Metropolitan's 92 pro team in France had 2 guys taken. One of them is Victor Wembanyama. Overtime Elite had the 2 Thompson twins taken in the first round, right? Michigan had 2 guys taken in the first round, blue blood. Arkansas had 2 guys taken in the first round, right? They're building themselves back up, whatever. Alabama, number 1 team in the country for a long time, had 2 guys taken in the first round, right? Both kind of later. Duke had 2 guys taken in the first round, both kind of later. Houston had 2 guys taken in the first round. That's it. That's the list. That's everyone that had 2 picks in the first round of the 2023 NBA draft. Further, only a handful of other teams and programs, the G League Ignite, UCLA, Miami, Indiana, Kansas, had multiple picks in the entire NBA draft at all, right? And so it's worth pointing out that Houston has worked their way into one of these top places to go to get drafted. I mean, we saw Quentin Grimes in 2021. Again, Marcus Sasser probably gets drafted at some point in 2022, but he came back for you to improve his stock. And then this year had 2 guys drafted in the first round, including a lottery pick, right? Like these things need to be taken into account because the only other, I mean, Metropolitan 92 and OTE are both pro type situations, and that's not the same thing, right? Same with the G League Ignite. Houston had a tremendous night. The 2023 draft was huge for the Houston Cougars. If I'm looking at who could be next year, there are 2 guys that jump off the paper as like, man, those 2 guys might get drafted in 2024 and might get drafted in the first round too. So the first one I talk about is LJ Cryer, because I think it's easy to almost like forget about how much of a pro he is going to be. As it stands right now, like if the draft happened tomorrow, he is projected currently as a early second round pick. I think it's all between picks 30 and 40 in the second round 2024 on a couple different projections I saw. Now, that's interesting because it's kind of like what Sasser was a year ago. People were talking about him being an early second round pick. He's just, a shorter guard and he fills it up, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So could LJ Cryer in his season in Houston next year after transferring in from Baylor have the same kind of offensive production that leads to him becoming the same kind of first round pick that Marcus Sasser just became, right? Could a great 2023-4 season be the kind of thing that puts him over the hump and becomes a first-round pick? I think it's really possible. I also think it's worth pointing out that the biggest knock on Cryer has been his defense, right? He's just not the defender that Sasser was. The knock on Sasser, I think, a year ago was consistency, and he hurt his shoulder, and they want to make sure he played healthy for da-da-da, right? Cryer's deal is his defense, but we know Kelvin Sampson is a great defensive coach. And what does working with Sampson do for Cryer? How does it help Cryer project? Does it help Cryer grow as a defender? I also think it's worth pointing out that Sasser did all this in the American Athletic Conference, and Cryer is the all Big 12 guy. He was a third-team all Big 12 player last year. There were 15 guys on the 3 all Big 12 teams last year. 4 of them got drafted, and another 4 were picked up as undrafted free agents. And there are at least 2 more going to the Summer League as of the recording of this. That is 10 of the 15 guys will be pros or potential pros in the coming weeks and months. And not all of them committed to the NBA draft, as seen with LJ Cryer, right? And so I think it's just pointing out that like he's a name that is known by pro guys because that's the kind of basketball pro scouts are watching. And then honestly, like for whatever you want to value it as, I know that we both saw Houston play last year, maybe don't think of it this way, but people will think of Cryer as shooting 40-ish% from 3 in the Big 12 next season as a more, important accomplishment than Marcus Sasser doing that in the American Athletic Conference a year ago. And for what it's worth, Cryer has shot better than Sasser from 3 in his career this far. And And so I think it's a real possibility. If Sampson can help him improve his defense, I think Cryer, a lot like Sasser, is a late first-round pick very, very easily. The other Houston Cougar I think we have to keep an eye on is Terrence Arsenault. Now, I know Terrence was a rotational guy some this year that didn't even get in every single game. He's a freshman last year, etc. But even with all that, there were pro teams that had a second-round grade on him as a prospect without having played a lot at Houston, right? I think the deal with him is so much potential and upside. He's such an incredibly good athlete, an incredibly hard worker, and just does some things, whether it's court vision or defensive prowess or rotational kind of stuff instinctively that you can't teach. And so pro teams see that, and pro teams see Terrence as a guy that, like, hey, we got to draft him in the second round right now just to have him on our roster. We can work with him in the G League and those kinds of things, right? He'd have had that right now. If he comes into Houston next season, has the typical year 1 to 2 jump we see people have under Kelvin Sampson, working with Kellen and Qantas in the offseason and all those kinds of things, you could see a real big leap from him in production between freshman and sophomore year, and thus you see him move from that second-round projection, I should say, based on last year's stuff, into a first-round guy. He's a big guard, 6'5", great jumper. And frankly, he'll be battling some with Damian Dunn for that third starting guard spot, but I wouldn't be surprised if there will be games that Terrence starts. I think that's a real battle to be seen between the two. Now, part of that will be consistency from Terrence, right? He can't have a year without consistent playing. He needs to be fairly consistent with his jump shot, fairly consistent with low turnovers, fairly consistently staying out of foul trouble and those kinds of things, right? But we know that year 2 in the Houston Cougar system, when we look at guards in the past, guys make that leap. Guys become more consistent. The discipline works over time, right? And so theoretically, you could see a great Terrence Arsenault next season. And if Terrence Arsenault from his freshman year was all potential and a great kid with that potential, and you always take a great kid with potential at least in the second round, throw a flyer on him. If just the potential is a second-round pick, if he fulfills or sees some of that happening as a sophomore, I think he's a first-round pick too. I really, really do. And frankly, if Cryer and Dunn go pro next season, and then he gets a lot more minutes his junior season, it might be another year. So we might go 3 years in a row with guys going in the first round. I'm excited about what the Houston Cougar basketball program is, folks. Like, this is a good sign. Again, not a whole lot of teams had multiple people drafted at all, let alone the first round. This is a big thing for the Houston Cougar program. It's going to be a fun thing to watch these guys go in the pros and go on and continue to represent the University of Houston so well. Excited for Jarace, excited for Marcus, excited for the program and the guys in it. This helps them too. It's going to be a real fun thing to watch happen. And this is that's even without talking about, like, what does Jamal Shed turn into as a senior, right? What does Juwan Roberts turn into as they move into more traditional power forward? We're like, what do they look like next season? We're following it all year long here at Locked On Cougs. Make sure you subscribe down below. You can find me on Twitter. Talk about it at Painsworth512. It's PAINSWORTH512 on Twitter, Instagram, and all of your favorite social media handles. Be able to talk all things Cougs. I love the NBA, so I'll also talk about the Rockets and stuff they then draft. I'll talk about the Texans and their offseason stuff, the Astros and their ups and downs and roller coastering, and just get healthy, Stros. All those kinds of things. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Locked On Cougs today. Locked On Cougs. It's a primary Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.